Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Jacquelynne Suguitan of TriNet, and we're here going to talk about today her experience in the startup ecosystem, how she got to where she was, and some of the I guess the difficulties and challenges that she had to overcome in this interesting podcast. So, Jacquelynne, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Eric. Thanks so much.
No worries. So, Jacquelynne, how did I meet you? It's been a long time, and I've totally forgotten, but I think it was an interesting story if I remember correctly.
So back in the day, I'm gonna age my pre-COVID,
hmm
uh, you were working out of a WeWork. There was a WeWork Soma that was there, and I had a networking event. I worked for a startup called Indenaro, and I was doing fractional CFO work. And I met you there because I think you were just working out of the office. I told you that I did dealt with fractional CFO, and
hmm
then all of a sudden you gave me your network. You came out and you said, you know, this person, this person, this person. This is why this person should meet with you. This is why, and you were selling me, even though you didn't really know if I was a good sales rep or not. And then you left and said you were going to make like eight, nine, maybe 10 introductions. And I remember leaving the event and I said, oh God, this guy is lying. Like, he's one of those people that just says he knows everyone just to show off. And like, I will never hear from him again. And then I remember waking up the next day and I don't know why you sent emails super early in the morning. And I remember seeing my inbox and every single person you said you would introduce me to, you introduced me to. And I think
hmm
it was because of you at the time, I connected with like a bunch of international accelerators and international programs because you are the super connector that you are. As we all know in this podcast, you are the super connector.
So you're in a senior sales position at TriNet. I
Yes.
mean, what was your journey like to getting there?
In trying it or in sales, because that is a
In
look.
sales, actually, let's start in sales. That's a good point.
So I guess my upbringing first. So, my parents both migrated here from the Philippines. So
hmm
my sister and I are the first generation. Growing up, my sister was my parents loved my sister. So she valedictorian, she went to Columbia, she got her master's. She went to the realm that my parents wanted, and she actually is like in the medical world. And
hmm
parents love her. Her
hmm
her husband got his MBA and God knows where, and they're both like the elite family. I, on the other, I tell every founder because a lot of my clients are founders, VCs, hedge funds, and whenever they ask me, which is rare, by the way, I haven't had this
hmm
question in a while, but every once in a blue moon, they'll be like, "Where did you go to college?" Which I'm in my 40s soon. I always say I go to UC San Jose State.
hmm
So like I went to a state school and you know my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. They wanted me to be a doctor and I went to college with the thought of okay, if they kept saying doctor, obviously I was an straight A student. So then they were like just be a nurse. My mom was a nurse. And so I went to college and I wanted to be a nurse because my parents said so, and I was miserable. So I
hmm
actually graduated in advertising and I graduated during the recession. So I
hmm
actually got a great job. I worked at an ad agency, one of the top ad agencies in the country. And I think 4 months into the job, they lost all their clients because of the recession and they basically cut and cleaned house. And obviously, I'm the first to go.
hmm
Uh, I'm telling a long story, by the way.
That's
Uh,
all good. That's what we want to hear.
so I wanted to be in the ad tech world and I couldn't find a job. And a recruiter was like, hey, you know, I didn't know what startups were because in college I graduated in journalism and that wasn't a thing. And they said there's a startup hiring entry-level salespeople. I said, you know what, I'll just do it because it's better than have no job. I've always worked growing up. I needed a job and I did it. And then I realized I was so good at it. And so I never left and I worked at this startup and they actually got acquired. And as a early 20 something that got acquired from a big company, you're like, this is fun. And so I went in the startup life and I did sales in startups and then I worked my way to corporate because I got older and I wanted more stability. Granted, my job is still chaotic. I'm very happy with TriNet.
Every job I find, regardless of the size of the company, is chaotic nowadays, but that's a different discussion. So
Yes.
I think you bring up an interesting dynamic. So I was the only child, and I think my parents also had the same thing. It's like, especially from an Asian background, right? It's like legal, medical, or something white collar, right? Like
Yes.
literally, that's the goal, and you have to do it the traditional way, which is, hey, you have to go to school, and you have to go and do like basically more or less STEM, right? Let's be honest, right? It's
Yes,
like if you do
absolutely.
anything in liberal arts, it's like you're black sheep of the family. Like I have political science, black sheep of the family. Um, how did you? Well, two questions, but I'll start with this one. How did you kind of overcome that, or when did you kind of recognized it when you were looking for that first job, right? In terms of that you were good at sales, you hated nursing, but when did it really kind of become part of your psyche or part of your mental model? Let's put it that way.
Of like being comfortable of like the job position,
Yeah.
therapy. I'm joking. Well, not really. Um, no, I like, okay, talk about therapy, but like, let's talk about, being Asian, being
Hmm.
like the first generation or even the second generation. I
Hmm.
look back, I guess it is therapy. I look back and a lot of the reasons isn't the fact that like they think they want you to be quote unquote smart or better than others. Although there is this idea of crab mentality, which if you know
Yeah.
what crab mentality is, that's a whole different situation.
Hmm.
Um, but I also think it's stability. I think the
Hmm.
reason why they put this in is in their mindset, these jobs will give you a stable condition, and this is why we left our country. And
Yeah.
I think that, coming into sales, you have this idea of like a used car salesman, or like
Hmm.
you're hunting what you eat, which quite frankly, sales is still not a stable income unless you're good at it, right?
Hmm.
And I think that mindset switch when I realized that I am fortunately naturally good at it. And I think what I came to realize and what my parents realized is like, as long as you're good at what you do, whether it's being an artist or, in sales,
Hmm.
and able to have a stable income for you to live comfortably. You don't need to
Hmm.
be the richest, but you live comfortably. I think our parents are okay. I also think it's kind of interesting now because we live in a time of AI technology
Yeah.
and a lot of these jobs that we think is stable in the past, and again, completely separate podcasts, um,
Hmm.
is no longer what we consider stable.
Hmm.
And God forbid, again, I'm 39, if I told my parents I would want to be a founder at my generation, my parents would laugh at me. And they're like, absolutely not. You will be poor. And
Hmm.
now, if someone says, I want to be a founder, I'm sure a parent would be like, what resources do you need? Let me take you to as many resources as possible so you can become a founder. So I think it's a different mindset now.
Interesting. Do you think you always had that? Uh, I'll use I'm going to use the word term entrepreneurial, but a little bit black sheep mentality when you were growing up, in terms of like, doing your own thing or trying to at least.
No. I
No.
Yes and no. I I grew up with braces and a unibrow, and I was a little chubby kid. Um, I was very insecure growing up, and I think part of being successful and I don't even consider myself entrepreneur, but I also think I deal with like a lot of quote unquote successful people, you deal with what do you call that? Uh, where you're thinking you're not good enough. I know it's a tip of my tongue. Uh,
Uh, Imposter syndrome, right?
yes, deal with that.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, but I think it wasn't necessarily, I think that played into the fact that I wasn't confident enough. I
Hmm.
think once you get confident in your own skin, it's easy for you to be confident professionally. I also think that surrounding yourself with the right people is a good one. Surrounding yourself with the Erics of the world that will introduce you to the right people is good. And sometimes you have to search for it. Like
Hmm.
it's not handed to you. You have to find the right organization for you to be uplifted to like the next level.
Interesting. Let's talk about imposter syndrome because I think that's something that we all talk through, right? I mean, especially in Silicon Valley, it's the fake it till you make it culture. But underneath all that, everyone doesn't matter what gender, race you are. There's a little bit of that imposter syndrome. How did you kind of overcome it? Was it again through therapy, time, or all of the above?
I'm still dealing with it every day, right?
Hmm.
I think like my own imposter syndrome is different on my aspect because I'm in sales and a lot
Hmm.
of my clients are founders. So the people I talk to on a regular basis are founders and VCs. And you talk to these people that have the greatest ideas. And like for me, I still have to remind myself that I'm just a salesperson. So
Hmm.
like I will always deal with imposter syndromes in this aspect of like, I'm not that brilliant. I am
Hmm.
not this. And that's my own personal struggle. But
Hmm.
outside of like the sales bubble, I mean, as a salesperson or someone that does BD, you always want more.
Hmm.
I'm never truly satisfied. And if I hit my quota or I hit my goals, what's next? I think that's
Gotcha.
a lot of professions. And I also think we live in an industry because of technology where we're always on the phone, laptop. So there's
Hmm.
no excuse to stop. It's
Hmm.
always a go-go.
Mm.
Even my partner who's an engineer, like they have their own metrics, and for him, it doesn't end. It's
Does
just
never ends. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Being in tech, it never ends. You also mentioned the second part in terms of the Erics of the world and organizations. How did you find people like me or organizations that you kind of are part of to build up and kind of maybe minimize the imposter syndrome, but maybe create your own brand in some respects?
yeah, I like that. I think we should touch on that later. It's creating your own brand.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
definitely want to table that because that's very important. But I mean, especially the organization you're in, it's important. Like for me, I have Junior League, which is here in the city, and it's a female group of women. A lot of them are not founders, they're entry-level positions. Some of them are the richest people in San Francisco and they're bored housewives, but a lot of these women are successful. And it's really
Hmm.
just meeting the right people in that network and volunteering. I teach Zumba. I don't know if you
Hmm.
know this. I
I do.
volunteer every Saturday and I teach
Hmm.
Zumba for the past 11 years. So, I mean, just putting yourself out there, doing hobbies you like, joining different organizations, even internal organizations. So, like within my organization, we're lucky enough, and I'm going to open a kind of worms here where we have a DEI organization where there is an Asian organization or women who work organization, LGBTQ plus. I
Hmm.
am with the leadership in the Asian organization. And so
Hmm.
like for those that are listening in where they're not in sales, they're not a founder, maybe you're in customer service, or maybe you work for a big company, you can be your own leader internally as well. And
Hmm.
I think finding a good support system internally in your organization is a big deal, especially like other Asians.
Hmm.
That is my saving grace in my company.
Interesting. So, I mean, we've touched a bit about marketing, and I kind of hinted about branding, right? And I'm a firm believer in creating your own brand. So, how do you think, well, how did you develop your own brand, and how does it kind of tie in with the organizations and people that you network with in order to kind of grow your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to answer that question, I do also think branding is important. I want to highlight this is like, I have to remind myself that people are always replaceable at jobs. You may be
Hmm.
the best person at your job, but unless you're the founder, truly you are replaceable. And
Hmm.
I think building a brand is important because if you were ever to leave your organization, you're bringing that book of business and your network with you. And a lot of times, what makes you from the next job is the people that you know and the connections you have. And I think that's really super important. As far as building connections, I always thought it was transactional. I think that's when I learned from you, you were one of my mentors,
Hmm.
that everyone is not transactional. What I mean by that, the last thing you want to do is meet someone and assume by meeting someone you're going to get something back and you're going to get something that you need back. So
Hmm.
I'll use sales as an example in BD. If I get introduced to someone, the mindset you do not want to get is, I need this person to send me leads, or I need
Hmm.
this person to get me what I need in order to get to point A to point B. But
Hmm.
the truth is, every single person has their own type of networking style. So I'll give you an example. Some people get the ecosystem like you and me. If I
Hmm.
introduce someone to someone I know, let me introduce you to the right people so you can get to point A to point B.
Yeah.
There are some people that don't do that. There are some people that keep their network close at heart, especially like VCs, for example. They're never going to share their network. They
Yeah.
keep close at bay. But what they could do is some people, not VCs, but people in general, they can invite you to events that most people don't have invites to. So by accessing that event, you're accessing things you need in that network.
Hmm.
Or I have someone that would never introduce me to people, and I bump into her at a networking event at a party. She's the first person because we're physically there together. Well, she'll be like, "Oh, have you met this person?" And I
Hmm.
realize she's not like an email transaction person. She's more so if you're with me and we're meeting people, we'll meet them together,
Hmm.
right? So you have different avenues of people that can benefit you from point A to point B. It's just trying to figure out what they're comfortable with and also not expecting much from people to constantly give you what you need. Seeing the genuine, like getting to know someone because you genuinely like that person and you genuinely want to know what they do for a living.
Hmm. Interesting. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of networking, the different styles that everyone has. Do you find that having your own brand is helpful, or have you like thought of that as your own tagline in some respects?
Yes, I think for me, what makes me a little different than some of my peers, because I think all of my peers do their own thing, is like
Hmm.
I like doing panels. I like sponsoring panels. I like being part of panels. I like moderating panels because by leveling myself as a salesperson and a BDB person, being part of this and being on stage separates myself from being someone that's just like a typical salesperson.
Hmm.
Then I'm like, okay, what am I doing as an add-on in order for me to excel in my industry? I also think that learning about what's going on in the world, not just being pigeonholed with the company you're in or what you're studying, like follow the news. If you're in tech, what's going on in tech today? What's being funded? What are the trends? What are your predictions? Having these eloquent conversations will make you different and will help you build that brand because you know what you're talking about. You're not a
Hmm.
robot.
Hmm.
I'm being passionate.
100%. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think one of the interesting things is, looking at yourself now, looking at yourself in the past when you were younger. Would you say you were always an extrovert, or you transitioned to being, from an introvert towards an extrovert? Maybe ambivert.
I think that I was an introvert extrovert for a very long time until I became more confident in my own skin through
Mhm.
therapy. Actually saw a life coach that helped out, like a professional life coach. Um, and again, surrounding myself with the right people that I eventually became an extrovert.
Mhm.
It's hard because again, because this is like an Asian group that we're talking to, like I had parents that were, and I love them dearly, but I believe like my mom specifically would put me down a lot, not because she was mad at me, but I think she just wanted the best of me. So
Mhm.
because of these put downs that I was constantly not good enough, like even if I came back with a good grade, it's like you could do better, or
Mhm.
even my looks, right? Like you could lose 5 pounds.
Mhm.
Um, I think that that pushed down being an extrovert because I didn't
Mm.
want to be seen as much. So it's more overcoming those obstacles internally for me to become who I am today.
I fully align with that and have my own history with that. So I totally get that. In terms of, you mentioned volunteering, you're someone who's taken a leadership role, both professionally and personally. What do you think are some of the things that people can do to grow their leadership style, even if maybe they're not in a leadership position?
I think one, like I said, follow news, podcasts is important. Knowing what's up to date in whatever sector that you're in, being the best and knowing the most. So, like, I'll use tech, for example, because I feel a lot of things is tech these days. Like,
Hmm.
wake up in the morning and I have like Strictly VC newsletter. I have multiple newsletters that pop up on my phone so I know what's going on, what everyone is talking to. That's important. Um, Constantly learning, going to events that you find interesting. Now, don't go to events that you're like, I'm just gonna go to go. Like for me specifically, I love AI right now. I'm very passionate with like how AI is impacting the world. I went to a panel yesterday, George Powell uh,
Mm.
they did one and it was with Menlo Ventures and it was AI technology, but AI to consumers. So
Hmm.
like how is AI impacting consumers, specifically even consumers that are in middle America that are not as because like we live in a bubble, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like find these interests that you like, go to these panels, they're interesting, and it actually surrounds you with the right people. Because then you'll start meeting people within your network that love what you do, that probably have connections, and that like they'll attend these events with you, and you could build your own networking group or your own like eco.
That you mentioned ecosystem, and I'm a big proponent of ecosystem as well, right? And I've always stated that it takes time to build it, right? Would you share that sentiment, or would you say there's things you could do to maybe accelerate that,
I
particularly if you're starting from zero?
Okay, starting from zero. This is my 2 cents and this is subjective.
Hmm.
Okay. So prior to my startup, I worked for a company called CoStar, and my clientele then, and that was when I worked at the startup, we got acquired, et cetera, et cetera. The
Hmm.
clientele I did then were brokers. And by brokers, I'm talking about like commercial real estate brokers that sold multi-family buildings, office buildings.
Hmm.
Obviously, the people that I work with today is a completely different world. So I have a bunch of people at TriNet, and usually I'll have someone that I mentor. And again, this is my opinion, how I do it. I think that LinkedIn is very important, at least today, 2025, in the professional world. Just like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, usually you have friends in your social media network of people you know. You probably follow people that you like because they're entertaining, but you normally, at most cases, don't let randoms follow you unless you
Hmm.
want to be an influencer. That's a different story.
Yeah.
So to speed up this, what I did on LinkedIn, if you're in a new role or a new organization, first thing is clean your LinkedIn. If you're a person that has a bajillion people on LinkedIn and you know no one in there and they're not in your industry, why are they in your LinkedIn?
Hmm.
Because if you're going to try to tap into, let's say, a specific vertical or a specific organization that you're really tapping into, and someone looks at you on LinkedIn, they actually look at your mutual connections. And usually, if they see that you're connected to 800 people, and random people, they're like, oh, this person just adds everyone.
Hmm.
So clean your LinkedIn is number one. And then if you're trying to build a network, while you're cleaning that, start looking at people on your LinkedIn. Like I had my first sale because my cousin was what was he? He was like the IT person of a tech company. Granted, even if you're not selling, if you have a friend that's connected to an organization that you really want to tap into, grab coffee with your friend and say, like, how do you know this person? Like, is there a way you can get me in? I think that's a big one. Like your own personal connection will get you from point A to point B.
Interesting. How do you maintain, being in sales, being in business development, how do you maintain your network? Like, how do you keep in touch with them? Because I have my own ways, but I'm sure you have yours as well.
So like on a sales level, I actually have a sales sheet and I keep track on a sales.
Nice.
I actually track things I bring out and things I get back.
Hmm.
I think that's important because there's always metrics and I have to
Yeah.
have my
Yeah.
personal metrics. But even outside of like transactional sales and more so
Correct. Yeah.
growing my network, honestly, it's like the people you're talking about keeping track of like strong networks, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the ones that what's the old saying? I remember hearing from a VC. It's like you probably could at least maximum a dozen people that you can easily pick up the phone and say, "Hey, can you do an intro or can you help me out with this?" Right? Because, to your point, it's like it's forget the transactional for a second, but just maintaining those connections and being less transactional. It's kind of hard nowadays, right?
It
Because everyone
is.
moves around physically, company-wise, all
Honestly, I look at my phone right now and I'm getting married this year.
that. Hmm.
And there were people that I met on a networking event that was strictly business transactional that are invited to my wedding this year. And let me tell you, I have family members not invited to my wedding, nor do I have friends from my. And I think to answer your question, the ones that stick, the ones that are willing to introduce you to who you want to get in the world are the ones that you genuinely become good friends with them because you
Hmm.
have so much in common. And I think coming into a relationship when it comes to personal and professional relationship, if you come there with this genuine intent to get to know them as a person and you actually like hanging out with them, I guarantee it a long way professionally because they want the best of you to do well and vice versa.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. You've mentioned passion a lot. How did you find your passion? Because I know when I was younger, I wanted to try everything, right? I didn't have a particular passion. And I think a lot of people are like that, right? They get sometimes stuck and then they're scared of doing something different, or they think, oh, maybe it's just a life change and their passions change, which is perfectly fine. But
Yeah,
how did you kind of figure out you were super passionate about sales and what you do now?
because I wake up every morning, I'm actually excited to go to work. Is that That's weird, right? No, I have
hmm
friends that hate their jobs. I see their Instagram posts. They're like, I don't want to go to work. And I'm like, why do you still work there? And I know
hmm
that the market is hard and people need to work to work. I've been there before. Um, but I actually really like what I do. And I think it's not even just what you do, but it's the people you work with. And I think that there are people I know, and I've been there at that situation where I loved what I did, but going to work was a struggle because maybe my manager didn't appreciate me.
hmm
And I think that is another conversation to have is like speaking up because a lot of us don't speak up.
hmm
Um, so I think it's really just waking up. Do you like what you do? Are Mondays that horrible that you don't like Mondays? Or are they like, oh, I hate Mondays, but it is what it is? I mean,
hmm
those two different worlds. Um,
Exactly. hmm In terms of you hit the nail on the head on something, which was, especially in the Asian American community, we don't speak up, right? We're trained to be kind of in the background. That's why we're classified as the model minority. How did you kind of break out of that shell, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a different flavor from when I asked you earlier, but I think it's important because I think that speaking up, there's a fear factor there, right? Because of the cultural context that we grew up in.
Yeah, there's another layer to that too, is also being a female in an industry that's male specific.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of engineers that are in a room full of male engineers. I know this because my partner has one female in his team, and everyone else is a team are males.
hmm
Then in my industry, if you watch Wolf of Wall Street or any
hmm
sales movie whatsoever, it's
hmm
all alpha males. And let me tell you, there is still alpha males out there. So it's not only juggling just like the model minority of being like a sub, but also being a female in this industry because it's
hmm
hard being a female in an industry full of men. So like, how did I overcome it? It's still hard. I think you and I were chatting about this prior. We were emailing each other, and like for me, when I write emails, I have these colleagues that will write emails and like send me this. And I'm like, I still get nervous to do that. Like I still have to say good morning. I hope you're having a good day. And
hmm
I know like that is not as assertive as a lot of people that could just ask versus like I still overcome it. I
hmm
shouldn't say thank you as much as I say thank you. I shouldn't say sorry as much as I say sorry, and it's still ingrained in it. But what I do now is I go to ChatGPT and I actually look at my emails, and if I think it's too much, I'm like, is this too sensitive? Sadly, or fix this email. Not saying go to ChatGPT and do everything that way. But more so like sometimes you need to put a mirror on yourself or maybe talk
Yeah.
to a friend and say, hey, like, what are your thoughts on this? Because it is hard stepping up at times. I still struggle with that every day.
Mm. You kind of touched on one of my final questions, which is you mentioned Chat GPT. So, I mean, overall, I mean, I could ask you the generic question of like, hey, how is generative AI going to impact sales and BD? But, looking at your career, like realistically, do you think generative AI overall is going to help or hinder, future generations, especially Asian Americans, as they come up the ranks? Right? As they try and figure out who they are, what their passions are, what they want to do for the rest of their career.
I am a very hopeful person with technology. At least I try to tell myself that. And what I think is AI is there to make things better. I hope, depending on who has the powers of controlling that be, the goal is to make things better. That's why VCs are like investing in AI. But like, I'll use sales as an example. So we use Gong. Gong is
hmm
a program we use when we're in sales and we have a call. After the call, it actually tells you like you were talking too long. Um, these are your next steps. So you have these type of AI technologies that actually help you as a salesperson. Now, is it more difficult to do transactional or to do sales? Absolutely, because now everyone has bots sending emails,
Mm,
and because more people are being inundated with bots, more people are spamming people, and it's harder
mhm,
to have a conversation and get in front of who you need to get in front of. And I think that goes back to what you're saying as far as the future goes. Ecosystem,
mhm.
being empathetic, networking, going to different organizations is going to get you there. And that will never change, and AI will never fix that.
That totally makes
Oh no,
sense.
you froze.
Oh, did
There you
I
go.
freeze? There you go.
5 second froze. It was 5 seconds.
Well, we'll edit that. That's all good.
No, but I to your point, like that's why we're talking about ecosystem, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not going to change.
No, no, totally. That makes sense. So, I always like to leave our guests with the final words. So if you had any final words for any Asian Americans or members of the AAPA who are listening, what would that be?
You caught up, you froze. What was the last two
Sorry,
sentences?
what would be any final words that you would say that of wisdom for anyone listening to this podcast?
Um, Expand your network. Don't be shy. And find people that like what you do and like get to know other people that are just as passionate as you with whatever you're trying to do and achieve in the world.
Excellent. Well, Jacquelynne, thank you again for agreeing to appear on the podcast, and maybe we'll schedule another one. I think there's a lot of interesting topics from what we talked today about.
Thanks, Eric. It's nice talking to you.
Thank you.